One of the many lessons we've learned through our diversity series this session is that in underserved communities, simply listening is often the first step towards progress. That's why, for this next installment, we pulled together a group of community leaders and asked them to challenge us with ideas we may have missed. We began with Kenneth Eban, Program Director at Students for Education Reform. Kenneth has spent several years carving himself a seat at the policy table. And through his work with Tasha Gandhi, who we profiled earlier in the series, he's learned quite a few things along the way.
I think the biggest learning is just it's a complicated, hectic system. There's no perfect science to it. It's a lot of relationship building, and it takes a lot of energy, to be honest.
Kenneth also repeated a message we've heard again and again. Find a mentor.
Find someone that you trust, especially a legislator that you can trust and that's really hearing not you for what your issue is, but you as a person, like what you bring to the table. It's that relationship building that's really the first step that gets you much further in the Capitol.
But even as he celebrates his progress, he doesn't shy away from the cultural misunderstandings he's had to overcome. Misunderstandings I perpetuated when I incorrectly referred to him as a black male.
Yeah, and so I'll even challenge your first assumption. Like, yes, you perceive me to be an African American, but my mom's Indian and my dad is African. So I can't even live my reality how I choose to live it. Like, it's how my society and everyone around me chooses that, like, what my reality should be.
And these assumptions do matter. Because, as Alfonso Wenker, Director of Diversity at the Minnesota Council on Foundations, explained to me, in St. Paul, how we're perceived is half the battle.
Right. We're told all the time, be you, bring your full self and all those things, but people don't often mean that because it gets a little dicey if you really bring your full self. So it's a call to our institutions to think about not just diversifying, right? It's great to welcome more people in and say we want to increase our numbers from a particular population, but then what is our work as an institution? How are we adapting or thinking about how we change our behaviors so that it's a place where folks really feel like they can thrive and not just be counted?
When it comes to this form of cultural sensitivity, Ibrahim Noor has a unique perspective. Born in Somalia, but educated in the U.S., he spent much of his professional life as a pilot for Somali Airways and only returned to America in midlife.
And Somalia was more like a police country. At least in my generation, there was the military dictatorship that was, ruling the country. So everything was about the government. And if you need something, you have to go to someone who is in the government. So coming to this country, especially Minnesota, it was very welcoming in terms of the society and all that. But also system-wise, it was totally different.
Totally different. Clearly, this is one of the many challenges we all face when looking to incorporate new communities in Minnesota-style governance. For lack of a better word, there's an acclimation period.
Lately, we have seen that people are actually getting out of their, box and actually approaching some of their representatives, which is good. But again, they are approaching that sometimes with the same mentality in Somalia, that if you know someone in the government, they can do from A to Z everything, even can bend the rules, which is not the case. So when they are approaching the representative, they approach from the perspective that this person can do everything for you, rather than, they can help you show the system.
Dr. Artika Tyner, a fourth-generation Minnesotan, has studied many of these dynamics in her professional life, and she believes one way to make progress is to acknowledge our shared history.
We also need some healing in Minnesota. The type of healing, if we specifically talk about racial justice, to acknowledge what has happened in our history, whether it's the lynchings that have happened in Minnesota or in the Rondo neighborhood. What was the impact of the freeway coming in? Sometimes we bypass the past and just jump into the future. I mean, one of the jewels that I think we have in our community is the wealth of community elders to share the knowledge, to say, for instance, what worked in the civil rights movement. Was it the boycotting that worked? Was it the legal cases? Was it the policy reform? Or was it a combination of all of the above?
Dr. Tyner also sees youth as an essential piece of the puzzle. Because, as she writes in her book on the subject, The Lawyer as Leader, it's the younger generation that often plants the seeds of social change.
I would say for youth, the first step is to empower them. Many of them haven't even discovered their sense of agency. the sense that they could be the leader or use their influence to create change. So even changing the notion of what the Capitol represents and getting to that notion of the public value of representativeness.
Now, obviously, cultural diversity is incredibly difficult to summarize in the tight timeframes of television, but throughout this series, there has been a common thread. In short, we as Minnesotans need to keep talking about these issues.
These are people's lives. That folks are dying, people are not succeeding in our systems, and we have to make sure that we're developing institutions, policy, practice, culture, ways of working together that make sure that this conversation doesn't fall flat.
I mean, if you just do this for political correctness, then things not going to go anywhere. I mean, you have to actually admit that there's something wrong here, an institutional wrong.
We ended with one last question. Considering all we've discussed, what does Minnesota today mean to you?
Well, that's easy. Coming from Africa, it's cold. But aside from that, I think it's a place for an opportunity for reflection, where we can combine, have the potential to combine our strength to make Minnesota a better place.
Well, Minnesota for me is home. I was born and raised here, and I'm not going anywhere. And so I'm hopeful that the work that all of us and many, many other people are doing will push this state to really think critically about who the decision makers are, how we develop culture and policy, and who gets to succeed in a place like Minnesota, because I want to keep calling it home. I don't want to have to go somewhere else for my family to succeed.
You know, Minnesota is a place of opportunity. I mean, really everything that I've ever dreamed of happened here in Minnesota. And I think that's been the large theme of this conversation today is like, what is the accessibility for people of color to those opportunities?
Minnesota is a place of becoming, because I think oftentimes we just get stuck in where we are. But as we look at the context of what's the future related to diversity, related to policy making, it's a time to reimagine. Reimagine education, reimagine the criminal justice system, and even reimagine how we make policies.